I'm Gary. I'm an alcoholic again. They haven't moved that light that hits you right now either. Uh, when we agreed to do a workshop, they wanted Rick and I to do it together. And they said it was going to be on sponsorship. So I get here, he's not here, and it's not on sponsorships. But that's okay. It's on the illness of the mind and the body and the spirit. And we can talk for a while about it. Because I think it's pretty clear that if you're a real alcoholic, that's what you got. There's an illness of the mind and the body and the spirit. And I don't know if the people who put the big book together originally knew what was going to happen when they adopted the circle and triangle, that most everybody in here are probably working out a 4th edition big book, and so you don't get that on what used to be the one of the title pages of the book. Well, it was the title page. And but it was a circle and a triangle. And on each side of the triangle, as you were looking at it, on your left would be the side marked, marked unity. If you're looking at the right side, you were looking at service. And if you were looking at the bottom, it's recovery. And that's equilateral triangle, which would probably mean that the bottom isn't necessarily supporting the other two. Wouldn't you think they'd kind of be equal in strength, if you will? And so when they came up with that, I guess I'm not sure they were initially thinking mind, body, and spirit. But that's what the symbol meant. It's an old spiritual symbol. I don't want to call it religious because I'm really not sure where it came from. But my thought is that it came out of, for some reason, it came out of some of those old religions in England, or Europe anyway. And, maybe the people that hung the rocks at Easter Island and something like that. You don't know, but that was it. But if you look at that, there was 3 answers to those 3 problems with that. And so unity, which is found in the fellowship we have, if you will, and the part of the disease it treats is the body. Now, surprisingly enough, the set of 12 spiritual principles that deal with that are the traditions, according to these thoughts here. And these are notes of several I'm looking at in my big book of several that we made a long time ago when Don and Don P. was still alive, and another one of us named Joe Hawk, and that we were always kind of considering this and all that. So that meant that the service side of the triangle is found in carrying the message, but it's also involved in service. It treats the spirit, if you will. And the 12 spiritual principles that do that are the concepts. So that's interesting, because my guess, if I look in the room, there may be 5 or 10 of us that are familiar with enough of the concepts to relate to what I'm talking about here. And I'm not sure I am. That's just the way things seem to be. And finally, on the bottom where it says recovery, of course, that treats the mind. And our thoughts then was that was the 12 steps that did that. Now, there's been a lot of experience and time go by since we had that discussion, and we wrote those things down. And the guy out in California has a website called called The Jaywalker. And on that website, he advertises a thing to work out of the big book with all that called the Big Book Awakening. And you'll look at some of this. He was part of that same bunch. He came along a little later, but he put that in there. So I guess I am looking at the spot now where a lot of years of sobriety and much of that time, if not most of it, dealing in the 12 steps. and finding that every time I dealt with the steps or went through them again or something like that, not only did I feel better and get better, but the more I was able to be involved in other things in AA besides just going to my meeting and working with others. But I avoided that for the service side of the thing for a long time. And when I left Denver and moved to Indianapolis, my friend Don got active in service. In fact, he went to his first service. It was a kind of a quarterly regional conference in Southwest Colorado with us. Julie and I took him down there, and it went down, and it was one of those area meetings. There were state meetings then. There was only one area for the entire state, but went down to that area meeting, and it was very contentious. I mean, they were arguing about just about anything, and I'll never forget the ride back. He thanked me for taking him down there. He says, "I really appreciate doing that." He says, "But I didn't like that much. I don't think I ever want to do that." And so a few years later, Julie and I moved to Indianapolis, and I hear from him that he's chairman of the state committee in Colorado, and he was calling me to do 10th step about some of his fellow people on the committee. And with that, and then of course he went on and became trustee at large, and spent his life hugely devoted to service, but still never got away from working one-on-one with people who are doing the weekend workshops or deals like this around the country. And until the cancer got too tough, he never missed it. He didn't miss any of these things that he was invited to for any reason, and did that. So I got a lot of my information around the tradition and the concepts from Don, and watching him and listening to what he did. And so now today I'm in a position where traditions are a discussion, or people bumping up against their traditions are a discussion just about every day of the week I'm at work. Because it comes up over a variety of things. And so I get to watch the illness of the body, mind, and spirit in action when we're sober. Ooh, that's great, turning that down. Thank you. And so I'm at a place now where it strikes me that there is something missing in my program when I'm not involved in all three. Of course, there's always some wise guy out there that uses the analogy of the old three-legged milking stool. Take one leg off, you're going to fall on your butt. You're going to fall off of it, and that's probably true for us. And I would have thought that's not true a few years ago. But the more I see what's going on, I see many of us doing one or one and a half legs of our stool. And there's guys like me who are the big book and the 12-step Nazis, and we get such joy out of working with others. We would rather do that than anything else in AA. And then there's also the guy who got drug into service, probably when he didn't know to say no in the meeting, or I don't want to do it, and he got nominated to be GSR, and drug into the service level of our fellowship, and that, not knowing what was going on and all that, and liked it and got onto it. Frankly, that's the person we want doing that, is the one that likes it. You don't want to drag someone like me that went in there and I didn't like him. But I did it because I was told it was part of the deal and I had to do it. And so I found other ways to do it without getting involved with that. We see those who try to do that, and there's just always something a little missing with us with that. Now, the missing thing with me can be whether I'm interested enough in what's going on in AA at our service level, the concepts level, if you will, to even read the literature that comes out, that are put out by the trustees, box 459. Hits my deck. How about the reports of the General Service Conference that came out? I have, it's fairly thick book, the old Life magazine size, and only thicker, and full of a lot of information and ideas and opinions, and I will read it all probably by the beginning of the year. I've had it for 2 months with that. And I'd like to tell you I don't have time to sit down and do it, but that's a lie. So I just see that as part of the issue for me and probably for all of us. There's going to be something about this that we like better than others. The problem with the part of the body of the fellowship, is we have so many changes and things going on now within AA that the old geezers like myself and some of the others really didn't have to contend with, or if they did, they found a way to do it without the anger and the stuff that goes on. That's touched in a couple of places. But let's just touch a little bit on the tradition side. And I'll preface what I'm going to say by the belief that when Bill took the long form of the traditions to the first conference in Cleveland and made the presentation, he wanted a deal done because he wanted out of his job. The fellowship had to take over Alcoholics Anonymous. It had to, because he and Bob weren't going to be around long. And Bob died almost immediately after that conference. And when Bob looked at those traditions, that's when he said, keep it simple. Let's don't louse this thing up. And I think Bill thought that was the easiest way we can do it. The simplest way would still be have two lords over the fellowship who ran it all, but that couldn't be, and aren't we glad now? So when he took a deal there, and they shortened the traditions, and the long form, the third tradition, if you will, bear with me a minute. Says our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. About that. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover, nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that, as a group, they have no other affiliation. And so now that gets changed to the only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop drinking. Well, let's see, that means we can include the person who's on the Atkins diet, because he's not going to want to drink because he doesn't want the carbs. But we're using that excuse to let anybody get into a closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because they can just go in and say, I have a desire not to drink. With that. And now where that is a problem is the reason the closed meetings were started was to protect those of us who wanted to protect our anonymity. It had nothing else to do than that. If I only went to closed meetings, I'm afraid somebody out there can cost me my job if they see me. But we're letting them in there because they have the desire to stop drinking. So that's only one of a couple of conflicts we have that are coming up in there. Now, the other one that I have only a little experience with, I'll touch out and watch for. It's going to be the advent of atheist and agnostic AA meetings showing up in your meeting schedule. And if you attend one, you're going to find they have completely rewritten the first portion of the 5th chapter. There's nothing about in the steps referring to God, the spiritual experience, or any of the above. So that's going to tick some people off. Already did me. So, but I still have to go along with the group's conscience, and they attended the meeting last Thursday, and I get to find out if I'm any trouble for taking them out of the meeting schedule or not when I go back to work Monday. But my guess is I am, and they're going to have me put it back, and I will. But I think those are serious threats to our fellowship and to the longevity of the fellowship. And I think it's a serious threat to the new person coming into AA today. Both those issues. Thinking they are. I was letting Jason and Larry read a thing I found. It kind of touches on this, if you will, particularly the 3rd tradition. And I wasn't planning on doing this till I got to talking about something else with Jason. But this is an amends letter written in 1993, and it's entitled "The Singleness of Purpose Amend." And HD from New Medford, New Jersey says, I recently completed the 8th step and have decided that my first amends should be to Alcoholics Anonymous itself, which I believe I have harmed to some extent by violating its singleness of purpose. I used to identify myself as an alcoholic and an addict. I do not anymore because I now believe other addictions are irrelevant at AA meetings. But aside from that, I also used to insist on talking about my other addictions beyond what was necessary to relate them to alcohol. I justified this by saying that alcohol was just another drug, and so it was unfair to expect me not to talk about all my addictions, and refused to attend any other fellowship because I claimed to prefer the wisdom and sobriety of AA. I realize now how rude and self-centered this position was. It is not a question of what is fair or whether alcohol is just another drug. The traditions and primary purpose of AA are what they are, whether I agree with them or not. In the past, when I was active, I often had dinner at the homes of people who did not use drugs, but who did drink. I never considered insisting that I had the right to smoke a joint at their dinner table because they were drinking wine. And imagine if I had, and then added insult to injury by saying, and not only do I have a right to use any drug I want to around here if you're going to drink, but I'm going to keep coming back and I'm going to keep using any drug I want in your home because I like the food you serve and your company better than the food and the company I find in the homes of my drug addict friends. And I have a right to do this because all drugs are the same and I don't care what the rules or customs of your home are. Then he goes on to say, I just love that parallel, but such a gross abuse of hospitality sounds preposterous. But that is essentially what I was doing by insisting that I had a right to violate AA singleness of purpose. I was abusing the hospitality of this fellowship. This is not an apology. I was too sick to realize how selfishly I was acting. And the mere apology is not necessarily an amends. I'm hoping to amend the harm I did by stating clearly what I did for the benefit of others and for the benefit of others, and further by not doing it again. And so that's probably our most prominent threat to our traditions, if you want, as I see it. And I think that's about what I can think of. I think I really do believe, and part of me is really glad I'm an old timer. But what's really concerns me is I kind of hope somebody else sees it at least partially this way to see the danger of what's going on. Because there's one person in this room who is a grand sponsee of mine, but I've got some great, great, great grand sponsees out there. And there's more coming because these guys are being taught to go out and help others and gals and help out and go help others and do things like that. And then what are they going to tell them when we're trying to be all things to all people and not have anything going? So the illness of my body and my mind and my spirit is very clear to me and very real. And personal to me, if you will. And some of you heard my story, but let me put it in some different terms. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. That's not saying alcoholism, is it? That's coming into the big book after they use the word alcohol and alcoholism. Our problem is selfish and self-centeredness. We think about ourselves all of the time. And with brief breaks if forced to speak of somebody else. Unless it's someone's really close to us, because if something happens to them, I'll feel bad. So maybe we need to get honest about our own sickness of body, mind, and spirit before you start going on looking at everything else. when we started writing 4-column inventory, but in the 4th column listing where we were selfish, self-centered, dishonest, and frightened, where we were at fault, what should we have done and said, and those sort of things, it struck me that that was showing up often. And I'd like to say I was angry, but I was always angry because it was about me. I had to do a 10th step on some of that when the committee got upset with me for taking the agnostics meeting out of the meeting schedule. It wasn't about the agnostics meetings. They were messing with me. Don't they know who I am? And so that's going to be the problem all our lives to some degree. That if we're not working in a spiritual program that involves all 3 sides of the triangle, I'm going to be in trouble. If I can't remember the traditions, whether it's regarding the atheist group or not, if I can't remember the concept and how we would deal with that in terms of that, and particularly if I can't stay in touch with my use of the steps to hopefully hold my stuff together long enough to have some kind of impact to do that, then that's a hell of a lot more than I thought I was going to say when I got up here. Any comments? Any thoughts? I'd even, yeah, ma'am. Hi, Judy. I'm going to back up a little bit later to do that because I figured that's exactly where the question was going. Let's look at our alcoholism, if you will. Let's just talk about the body part of it. It's very clear that when we take liquor and put it into our system, something physically changes. It's a phenomenon that has nothing to do with our head, but what with our head happened before we took the drink. So it's pretty easy to understand that this is a physical disease. It's easy for us to understand it's a physical disease. It's not easy for our non-alcoholic family and friends to see it as a physical disease. They just think it's crazy. Hell, he came in last night just completely loaded and sick and everything else, and he's back out there doing it tonight. What the hell's the matter with him? Well, he's got alcoholism. He's sick, and that's a physical disease. And so now we're talking about which part of these triangles is going to take care of that. And, the big book's clearly right. What initially takes care of that is the fellowship, the 12 steps, isn't it? The 12 traditions. Because we got people coming around us in there saying things like, we understand. I don't know that we believe that or not, but if they say, yeah, I understand, I did the same thing, and that's the same cop that picked me up, then the fellowship is working. And so that guy is staying in that room because of the tradition. It's not. That goes a little bit to where you're going, too, with what I'm thinking about that. Now, in any meeting, I don't relate to drug talk. I have no experience with it. I attended a meeting. Julie and I attended an anniversary meeting of a very good AA group in Indianapolis about a year ago. And the speaker was a fellow from Chicago who got up and introduced himself as an alcoholic and a drug addict. And he never once used the words of either drugs or alcohol in his talk, but he talked about being high. I was loaded. I was screwed up. I was drunk. I wasn't high. And it was a huge difference in me. And the lingo went a different way. And I went home and I told Julie, let's go find an AA meeting. We didn't get one. It was an open meeting. Now, going with that, are you aware that only alcoholics are to talk at AA meetings, whether or not they're open or closed? That's what they're meant to. Only alcoholics are the ones supposed to be speaking at any AA meeting. Open meetings have that and all that. So my guess is I see a lot of heads in here saying, really? Well, why am I going to meetings where anybody and everybody can get up and tell their story? I'm not trying to change your groups. They can do whatever the hell they want to, but they're outside of what this is about. In my home group, we have a format. We are an open discussion meeting because we got tired of throwing the druggies out at, on January 20th and the snow ass deep, and there's not a NA meeting within 10 miles. And that just would get more and more difficult because they weren't people that we didn't like. They really weren't. And we knew many of them that said, man, you can't stay in our meeting. So our format now reads, this is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. All are welcome here. However, if you are not an alcoholic and inadvertently asked to speak, you are expected to pass. It stopped our trouble. The belligerent drug addict in there that wanted to stand up and fight about it quit. In fact, he quit coming. And because he couldn't talk. That's, part of our disease too, isn't it? And that it hadn't been an issue for him. We've been doing that now, I guess it's 2 years. Pass it on. Okay, so now how about the mind? We were talking about mind and spirit. When I took my first drink, that first time I got enough to drink when we were passing the bottle of whiskey around and that I make so much fun of, and that I had that spiritual experience unlike any I ever had. That was the most profound spiritual experience I had ever had in my life because it answered everything. That feeling of not belonging in that group, in that car, changed to where I felt like I owned that group in that car. It was huge, and I never took another drink that I wasn't looking for that experience. Okay? So now we're talking about something else altogether, aren't we? But seemingly, what's going to cover that? Well, we're pretty sure the steps are going to cover that, but we're talking about spirit here. Something changed in my spirit when I drank that Four Roses whiskey. And it changed it to such a huge deal. And so now we're told here that the concept are what deal with the spirit. I got a little trouble with that, frankly. I'm not sure our ideas about what this was about is true now. And you can't make it black and white. It didn't work. But it was a huge experience. And it took me the longest time, for some reason, to understand that first drunk was a spiritual experience. I always thought a spiritual experience was something like Bob Flash a Lion, or Bill Flash a Lion, or some of the other things. I thought, how about the guy that would come into your meeting and say, and be laying on the floor and nothing that had ever worked in his life before to stop bringing, and all he says is, God help me, and his next memory is he's calling Alcoholics Anonymous for help. I saw that as a spiritual experience. I didn't see my drink as a spiritual. That is a spiritual experience. I didn't see my drink as a spiritual experience. And they're probably both the same. Certainly life-changing experiences in both cases. And so there's some other little conflict here for us to mess with, isn't there? To think about it. So Larry, I having said all of that, the answer has got to be all three, doesn't it? I think that we need to be involved in AAs, and there's going to be parts of it that just suck. When one of us goes on in a business meeting, it can drive you crazy. I've probably written more inventory over those kind of monkeys. That so-and-so took up the whole thing. And I wanted to say something else, and I didn't get a chance. It's always the problem, isn't it? Don't they know it's about me? So just those are things going about that. But I really do believe that the longer I'm around and the more experience I have, we do. Several of us in here know my friend Rick in Iowa. And I'll never forget the day he called me, and he came back, and he'd become the delegate for Iowa because they drew his name out of the hat. And he was as surprised as anybody else because he didn't think he knew enough people to even get that close. He called me about that, and I said, well, he said, what am I in for? And I said, well, I never quite did that, but I expect I'm going to hear from you as much as I did from Don when he was doing that. And I better, because if you aren't 10-stepping like he is, you're really going to be in serious trouble. And he did. And he had a horrible experience there that first year. They were contentious. They were fighting over everything. Nobody was really trying to get stuff done. And he said, man, he says, I think I got to quit. You can't quit. You signed up for 2 years, buddy. And so he went back the second year and he had a wonderful experience. And he's glad he did it. He's not signing up for another experience with him, though. But he's glad he did it. And it's rounded his life. He's learning a lot of things about that now. That keeps you busy. If you think you're sacrificing family life or something else for Alcoholics Anonymous, take a look at it, because that's also a part of the deal. Julie and I have 3 daughters, and we're all close. We got one that's a little troubled with me, and then my AA and her with her Al-Anon. And she feels like we left her completely out. She had to be raised by wolves or something because we were out at AA and Al-Anon all the time. Now, she wasn't raised by wolves, but she's true about what we were doing. There was a night one time when Julie and I were coming home from meetings. She'd been to an Al-Anon meeting down the hall or something like that. And me from an AA meeting, and she asked the question, how can we see we're supposed to practice these principles in all our affairs, and how do we practice them at home if we're not there? Hell of a question. I don't think we're the only ones in this room that were guilty of doing that. And so that means we got to think about what? Let me think. Am I out attending just another meeting where my child or children are sitting at home without a father or a mother there? Or is it something important that's a special thing? And those kids understand that it's special and doing that. So what tradition does that follow? Because that's certainly part of the sickness of mind, body, and spirit. So it's a broad area. Lots of things going on. I'm not saying anything. I'm not taking shots at anybody here. Everything I've shared, I've done. And Julie did most of them with me. And I mean, it just is. So all those things come into play. And I'll have people wanting me to do things with them at an AA function and all that. And I'll just say, hey, not tonight. The little girls are coming over. The ones that our daughter adopted with that are coming over. We're going to be grandma and grandpa again. Mostly it's grandma and grandma, but anymore. But I'm there, and the youngest one likes to come out and sit and visit. Once in a while, she come out with me, and I'll be sitting out in the patio with a cigar. She'll come out there. She doesn't get any of that cigar, but we're out in the air and all that. We have some fun conversation. And I don't share them with her, and I don't think she shares them with her sister. And I don't tell her anything too private because she'll share it with everybody. But that's it. But any other thoughts or questions on this? I don't. Wonderful question, isn't it? I had other problems with life in general. The only substance that gave me problems was the alcohol. But that exposed that my problems were in general. What I found over the years, and it's going back as far as I can remember in AA, probably most of us that came into AA had used other drugs. And so we came in confused. We don't know if we're a drug addict or an alcoholic or a sex addict or both or all the above or whatever the hell it is with that. And what happens over time is you kind of sort that out. I remember Don when I just noticed one day that he'd been introducing himself in AA as a drug addict and an alcoholic for years. And all of a sudden, he stopped doing it. I says, why aren't you calling yourself a drug addict anymore? He said, I'm not a drug addict. He says, I'm an alcoholic who used a boatload of other drugs, but I always could put the drugs down. I had to drink. I had no choice about alcohol. I had to drink. So if you can put one down and you can't put down the other, that might help you sort out where you are with the chemicals. I can't do it for you. Larry can't do it for you. You need to think about it and put it in there. There is a small number of us who truly are both, but it too is minority, and you're as welcome here as anybody with that. So that's it. We are Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's what we treat. If you're not an alcoholic, we could kill you. And I say that seriously, because you're in the wrong place to fix a disease you don't have. If you think I'm kidding you on that, I'll be happy to tell you about those that have died, that have tried to do that. And unfortunately, I was one of them that was welcoming them in the meeting for a time. And I remember a time there was another man in Denver who had a big part in my life. We called him Big Frank because he was big shock of white hair and fingers about that big around. It'd hit you right there and got your attention. And I can remember going to meetings with Frank and that lady being there, particularly that I'm talking about. And he's telling that lady she's got to find something else. And I said, why are you doing that? He says, I can't smell any whiskey on her. Okay. Now, what that meant is he didn't believe she was an alcoholic. And we tell everybody, nobody's going to make the decision whether or not you're alcoholic. It's up to you. And for the most part, that's true. However, our big book in Working with Others makes a line real clear that we have to be satisfied that the person we're working with is a real alcoholic. Doesn't mean I got to tell him whether or not he's an alcoholic. I got to be satisfied he's a real alcoholic. Because the message I'm going to carry is to help people who have alcoholism, who are real alcoholics. To simplify the big book's term of the real alcoholic versus the other alcoholic, let me put it this way. It's a pretty thin line, but it's worked for me pretty well. When I hit that nut house, I was diagnosed as a chronic alcoholic. And there were other men who came in there that was diagnosed as acute alcoholics. I assure you, I thought I was acute alcoholic, but I did not have acute alcoholism. I was a chronic alcoholic. And the difference was that I drank because I was alcoholic. The acute alcoholic was alcoholic because he drank. In other words, the acute alcoholic was the person that would go into the bars and drink seemingly normal for a long period of time, and then they crossed what they talked about was that line, and they crossed from normal drinkings into alcoholism. And if you sit with some of those guys and then gals and talk with them much, they're welcome at the meetings, don't misunderstand. But if I got to make a choice to work with them, and I have trouble relating to them, because the first time I got a hold of enough, I had a spiritual experience and it worked. I was alcoholic before I drank. I just needed to add alcohol and do that. So we've got these kind of people coming in, and then we also have heavy drinkers who never become alcoholic. They never cross the line, but they may drink just like I did. And I had buddies that walked away from it and all that, and still drank normally and all that, and they hammered it down. And for a while, I had a hell of a capacity till it went away. And then I'd get blotto on a half a pint. But you hear the difference? There is a difference amongst us with that. And so once you're satisfied he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of our malady. You might want to look up the word malady in your 1940s dictionary like I did. It's a hopeless condition. These days we use it like it was a headache. But anyway, we need to make a decision whether we can be of any help to somebody based on our experience. Our desire to help them is a different thing. That's warm, mushy thing we got going on inside us that we want to be everything to anybody that's in pain because it bothers us when we see that they're hurting. It's still about me. It bothers me if I see that you're in pain. But if I know you're a real alcoholic, I might have something that's really going to help you. And that's the difference. Kind of goes to what we were still talking about the three answers to body, mind, and spirit, doesn't it? The idea of service is the 12th step, is to carry the message. That's the only idea of service. We're trying to find ways to make our message more available to more alcoholics out there who may not find it any other way. So service was started for us to get into prisons and jails. One of the men in AA I love most is a fellow named Tom I. He's out of North Carolina. And every time I'm on a program with him, I tell people I want to be just like that when I grow up. And he was one of the first ones to take AA into the worst of the prisons out there. And he came from prison, didn't he? And so they had that going when he came out, and he was a natural do it. They were mostly just trying to get into the jails. And then they pushed a little harder. In Denver, we were fighting with the Denver Detox Center to let AA in there, get in there and hustle them. And they did. It was fine. They won't let you do it now because the doctors want it all. It's all about them and money. So we got some things like circus is all about that. And you got the CPC committees who trying to carry messages into judges and doctors and lawyers. And all these people are going to run into them. And generally, when we put the pamphlets in there, what we get is a lawyer, and it's generally the one whose office we dropped them off in. But it works. So everything that goes on in service isn't about the politics of service. It's about carrying the message. And the reason the service entities need new blood in there, that had happened this last year in general service at the conference, is we get the old blood that's in there. And they call them trustees because they got a 7-year sentence there. And they do that, and they get involved on these things. And some of them are very good, but they get there so long, they think they know much more. And we're told when they come into AA that we're upside down organization. What goes to general service starts at the groups. If you wanted to look at the agenda from the general service conference we just had in April, look at where they came from. Not a damn one of them came from the groups. They were all passed down out of ideas that trustees had to do with that. That's our fault. We're letting it happen. And as much as we don't want to be involved in that crazy stuff that the GSR wants to talk about when he gets there, we don't want to listen because I want to talk about me again. We're just setting it up more and more. Our whole idea of what our fellowship was to be about was just that. And so whether it's your general service structure or maybe those of you from Milwaukee, you have a pretty good intergroup there. And I know the guy that just retired as manager there, and you got a new person coming in. And they need the support. Whoever's answering the phones and getting the volunteers to go out and work with the new people. That's the nuts and bolts of the deal. And it's more fun than anything. And so that, I'm just trying to lay out what this is all about. So the concepts we need to know because they tried to protect the service levels from the individual, like me, who's going to go in there and it's going to be all about me because I got the best ideas or I'm the acute alcoholic or whatever the hell it is. Any thoughts? Any ideas? Question? Sir? A lot of good yeah, for the taper, he said he sounds to him like the country's doing the same thing. Absolutely, Yeah, water and everything. Yeah. Yeah. The parallels are unbelievable, aren't they? Yeah. That's why I hate watching the news because I start sucking up seat cover and it gets a little tough. Man. Hey, Tammy. How about that, huh? There you are. There you are. You're absolutely right. That's right. Absolutely. You know, sponsoring the new kid in. But we're not here to treat your nicotine problem. We're not here to treat your dope problem. That there's a whole difference. That's right. I think what you're talking about is a first step experience after you came in. And if we have sponsors who aren't sitting down with us at the big book and going through the doctor's opinion, we don't get a chance at a spiritual experience with the first step. That's a problem. Regarding the service, you're absolutely right. How many of us in here had sponsors who directed us towards service? Well, actually, that's a pretty good bunch. Normal group this size, you might see 5 or 6 hands come up. That's unusual. So that, but the problem is sponsorship. You're absolutely right. We're not heading them in there because we just don't. We're too lazy, too tired, too something. Man, write down what your problem is. Okay. Bless your heart. Yeah. Yeah. We do need the time to find out, don't we? We really do. This one was first, I think. Hi, John. Well, you wouldn't say it in a beginner's meeting, though, would you? I would. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, okay. I hear what you're saying. Your big push is an old push. I've been doing it for 40 years. It's not a big push. It's just the way the facts were laid out for us. And I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying with that. My experience is my problem is my mind because I'm going to think it's all about me and I know better than anybody. But that's it. And that kept me drunk and in trouble and in jail and in nut houses until I had to find out that I can't manage my life. That means I can't think myself into this sick mind can't fix this sick mind. I need to take the steps and find those things. But this isn't the place for that argument here. There's another person over here. Sir. Hi, Charlotte. Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Could be. That's as good an argument as I got. Yeah. Well, I didn't invent mine either. Yeah. In the back, the lady in the red. Hi, Cindy. Are you thinking, are you saying that something I'm saying here means I'm intolerant? I'm not taking that personal. I'm just trying to throw that question out. Oh, yeah. Most of us do. Oh, yeah. That's true. I'm still irritated about that ship. Yeah. That's right. That's right. We got time for about 2 more. Just make a quick comment. I think it concerns me. I guess, and it hit me right now. You said you had respect for the tradition, so you don't talk about other things wrong with you in meetings. And I think probably that needs to go a bit further to those in the group who don't relate to what you're talking about. It's not that they're being angry; they just don't understand if we're in there talking about our drugs problems or our depressions or that sort of thing. And generally they just get up and leave. But who's next over here? I saw 2 hands. Okay, ma'am. Right, yeah. Yeah, the general discussion now with it from the doctors is they're talking about the dopamine levels we have and the rope-a-dope and that but what makes that funny is anything can raise or lower our dopamine levels and all that. So that's not an explanation for either, but it's common, and they may be getting closer. So, okay, one more. You've been back down the back. Sorry, but you with the bald head and the long hair. We didn't have any problem knowing who I was talking about. Well, none of those were appropriate. You were inappropriate, and so were they. That boils that down. That is not a discussion goes on, because anybody in there can believe anything you want. And in this room, I bet there's 20 different ideas about it. And then if you sit down and talk about that, makes it 30. So that's inappropriate. And for me to come in and start expressing that I am an atheist and you don't need God to get you sober, that's as much as a belief system as I have, as a believing in the God of my understanding with that. So they have no right in here to talk about those things either, as I see it. That's what gets crazy. I hate to shut it off, but we've been going for an hour and a half, and we could probably do another hour and a half. You guys have been great, and it's a great subject to discuss, isn't it? And we're seeing it. And ma'am in the back, the program is already getting watered down substantially, and it goes way back. The cover to the second edition of the Big Book, when they had, the little cover that protected our anonymity on there, if you'd open it up and at the inside, it said there are 300,000 Big Books having been sold. And you start the forward to the forward to the second edition, and it tells we have 150,000 sober alcoholics in AA. So we were batting 50%. So somehow we become less and less able to attract the alcoholic in here. Now, some of that can be due to style, because initially when they were having the really good luck with alcoholics, they were really qualifying them. Those new alcoholics coming to AA when Bill and Bob were first starting at this really almost had to prove themselves that they're real alcoholics of the hopeless variety. And they didn't get worked with until Bill and Bob and those guys were convinced that they were that sick. And so we're bringing anybody in right now who's looking for help, and all I have to do is say they're alcoholic, and we're going to let them stay. And that's the way it should be, I think. But that's part of the problem. We're getting it watered down. Do you want to close with the Lord's Prayer, or you want to just go?